So the Chiefs got absolutely destroyed in the Super Bowl. And honestly, it was so bad that Brett Veach has no choice now but to make some serious changes. No more half measures, no more running it back just because things almost worked. This team's weaknesses were fully exposed, and now they have to be addressed. In today's video, I'm going to break down exactly what those changes need to be. But before we get into that, we have to talk about something that's been driving me crazy. This idea that Patrick Mahomes just ruined his legacy because of one game. And we also need to get into what Travis Kelce just said about his future, because it sounds like he's really wrestling with a tough decision right now. What if I told you that getting blown out in the Super Bowl was actually better for the Chiefs than if they had lost in a nail-biter? Sounds insane, right? That's exactly what I thought when I read this tweet from Adam Best over at Arrowhead Addict. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he's completely right. Let's say this game had ended something like 38-35 and the Chiefs lost by just 3 points. In that scenario, you could easily justify running it back with most of the same guys. You could say, well, we were just a play or two away from winning the whole thing. And that mindset would have been a huge mistake. But before we get into the details, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your support. Instead, because they got absolutely embarrassed, there's no way to ignore the weaknesses anymore. The offensive line, a disaster. The wide receiver corps, nowhere near good enough. The offensive play calling, completely outmatched. This game was so bad that Veach has to make moves. He has no choice, no more saying, hey, maybe Joe Thuney can slide over to left tackle and make it work. No, that's not going to cut it. If Thuney's on this roster next year, he needs to be playing left guard. No discussion. And that's just the start of what needs to be fixed. I'm going to go deeper into that later, but first I have to address something, because I keep seeing people act like Mahomes just erased his entire legacy with this one loss. And I can't believe I even have to say this, but no, Mahomes did not ruin his legacy. Did he play great? No, absolutely not. But let's be real. His coaches didn't adjust. His offensive line let him down in the worst way possible, and he was pressured on over 50 of his dropbacks. He got sacked a career high 6 times. And yet somehow people want to act like this is the game that defines him. Here's a reality check for those people. Patrick Mahomes has now been to 5 Super Bowls before turning 30. That's the second most Super Bowl appearances for a quarterback, tied with John Elway, the only guy ahead of him, Tom Brady, who made it to 10. And speaking of Brady, let's talk about what actually ruins a quarterback's legacy. Because last I checked, Mahomes isn't the first all-time great QB to have a rough playoff game. It happens. Joe Montana, one of the best to ever do it. In 1987, he played so badly against the Vikings that he got benched. He finished that game with just 109 yards, a pick 6, and a 12 for 26 stat line. And his team got upset in a blowout, 36-24. Tom Brady, in 2010, the Ravens annihilated him in the wildcard round. Baltimore jumped out to a 24-0 lead, and the final score was 33-14. Brady completed just 23 of his 42 pass attempts for a grand total of 154 yards. He threw 2 touchdowns, sure, but he also threw 3 interceptions. He was so bad that the Ravens didn't even need to pass. Joe Flacco finished that game with 4 completions for 34 yards, and it still wasn't even close. But so, yeah, bad playoff games happen, even to the greatest of all time. The argument I keep seeing is, well, yeah, but those games weren't in the Super Bowl. And okay, fine, but let's not forget that in order to make it to a Super Bowl, you actually have to win playoff games first. Montana and Brady were so bad in these games that their teams didn't even get to the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, Mahomes got there and still has 3 rings before 30. So let's stop acting like this is the end of his career or something. All right, let's switch gears and talk about Travis Kelce, because this is where things start to get really interesting. He was on his podcast, New Heights, with his brother Jason, and he had a lot to say about the Super Bowl loss. He took full accountability, saying he could have done more, been a better leader, a better blocker, and stepped up in key moments. But of course, the biggest question everyone has is he going to retire? All right, back to Kelce. So is he retiring? Well, maybe. Right now, it sounds like even he doesn't know. He said he's not making any big decisions yet. He's just taking time to process everything. And he made it clear that this season was tough. He's played a ton of extra football over the years because of all these deep playoff runs, and it's really wearing on him. He even admitted that at times this year. It started to drive him crazy. Now, speaking of money, let's talk about Patrick Mahomes and his contract situation. This upcoming season, Mahomes is slated to have the 3rd largest cap hit in the entire NFL, coming in at a staggering $66.3 million. That's a massive number, and the only 2 players with a higher cap hit than Mahomes or Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson. Honestly, that's pretty crazy when you think about it. It's almost comical seeing those two QBS making that kind of money. But hey, I digress. As much as Mahomes has done for the team, $66.3 million is still a huge cap hit, and the Chiefs will likely need to lower that number by converting some of it into bonuses, which they seem to do every year in some form or another. But even with those adjustments, Mahomes will still have the largest cap hit on the team by far. After Mahomes, we've got Chris Jones, who has the second largest cap hit at $34.8 million, followed by Juwan Taylor at $27.4 million. Taylor's cap hit is pretty substantial, but he's not going anywhere this year. And honestly, I don't think that's the right move. You can consider moving on from him next year. But for now, he's likely going to be the right tackle for the team in 2025. Right after Taylor, we have Joe Thuney, who's at just under $27 million. And of course, Travis Kelce, who's the fifth largest cap hit on the roster. All of these guys are integral to the team's success. But when you look at the numbers, it's clear the Chiefs are going to have to make some moves to free up more cap space. Right now, the Chiefs have only $15.7 million in cap space, which places them 22nd in the league. That's not a lot of room to maneuver, so the team will definitely have to make some moves to clear up more space. One of their biggest priorities, in my opinion, should be to retool or rebuild the offensive line. Joe Thuney, who's in the last year of his contract, is 33 years old, and with his age and salary, it's hard to say whether the Chiefs will offer him an extension. If they do, it could lower his cap hit, which would help free up space for other moves. Trey Smith is another key player who's going to be a free agent, and he's likely going to command a lot of money, around $20 million a year. That's a lot for a guard, but he could reset the market, especially with the way other guards have been paid recently. Paying Smith, along with all the other guys on the offensive line, could get really expensive. The Chiefs are also going to need to focus on their wide receiver room. Hollywood Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Justin Watson, Mecole Hardman, and Juju Smith-Schuster are all free agents. And right now, the only wide receivers on the roster are Rice and Sky, who's likely out of the picture for next season, and Rice is going to be suspended for part of the year. So the Chiefs are going to need to add some bodies to that group, especially since they don't have a lot of depth at the position right now. And then in the running back room, both Kareem Hunt and Samaje Perine are free agents as well. The Chiefs can't afford to have Pacheco be the only guy back there. They need to add some more depth to the backfield. On the defensive side of things, there are a number of key free agents as well, like safety Justin Reed, linebacker Nick Bolton, and defensive end Charles Omenifiu. There are also a few other guys like Joshua Kindo, who the Chiefs traded for but never even played, but that's a whole other issue. The defense is in a better position than the offense in terms of cap space, but there are still some important moves to be made to keep this team competitive. Now, when it comes to the offensive line, I think Brett Veach is going to do what he can to fix it. Remember, he promised Mahomes he would fix the O-line after that Super Bowl loss to the Bucs, and I think he'll do it again. So the question is, how? Will they keep Trey Smith or maybe go with someone like Kingsley Suamataia, who they've tried at guard before, or will they go after a left tackle in free agency? That's tricky, though, because finding a starting caliber left tackle in the draft is a real challenge, especially when you're picking at the end of the first round. But the Chiefs do have that extra third-round pick from the Snead trade. So if the right player falls, they could potentially move up in the draft to grab him. There are some veteran left tackles out there, too, like Cam Robinson, Ronnie Stanley, or even DJ Humphries, who has said he'd love to return to KC. If they can land one of those guys, that could be huge for the O-line. There's a lot to think about here, but ultimately, protecting Patrick Mahomes' blind side has to be the number one priority. That would allow Thuney to move back to guard where he belongs, which would certainly help stabilize that left side. And let's not forget, the Chiefs also signed a bunch of players to reserve future contracts recently. These are guys who are on the practice squad at the end of the season, and now they'll have a chance to compete for spots on the 53-man roster next year. Some of these players might surprise us, just like Justin Watson did a few years ago. There's going to be a lot more movement in the coming weeks, possibly even some coaching changes, but rest assured, I'll keep you updated every step of the way throughout the offseason. For now, I want to hear from you. What do you think the Chiefs should do with the offensive line? Should they pay Trey Smith and go after a left tackle, or should they let Smith walk and spend that money on a tackle? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.